least 3 from the audience. So my name is Patricia McDonough, and I want to thank you for having your talk last night. It was amazing and very insightful and inspiring as someone that's entering their dissertation journey, not my doctoral journey, but the dissertation journey. One of the questions I have for you today is, what sparked your interest in what we now call college choice?
So first I'm going to have to navigate who I'm looking at. So what sparked it is I was an employee at Stanford University and started taking a course, and people would sit around saying, well, when in my high school people went to Yale or Princeton, and apologies for those people who were where I said some of this last night. And my response in my head, I didn't, of course, voice this out loud, was people in my high school went to Gillette's, the razor factory down the street. And, you know, my own college choice process, I was not always mature. Some people would argue that I'm not now, but it's an expectation anyway. I decided, I had been identified early on at school that somebody said, you're smart, you should think about going to college. And so I'm first gen. And so, you know, I just kind of took that assumption and didn't know what it really meant. And then my best friend's older sister, and we had to take a bus and a train to get to school, and sometimes we would commute with her boyfriend, who was a tow truck driver. And so we would all, you know, one of those giant ones where you have to hop up. And she decided she was at the community college and was going to transfer to the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And she said it was Sin City. And I was coming from a small Catholic high school where we changed classes in single file and silence. So Sin City sounded very attractive to me. When you're thinking about, you know, college characteristics, there isn't that category, even still. You could be known as a party school, but so Janice, the older sister, was going, so then Patty decided she was going to follow her sister, and then I followed them. So in the work of a former doctoral student of mine, that's chain migration. And so, you know, I never thought about it. I didn't have anybody to ask. I did think about going to Suffolk University, which was in downtown Boston. I mean, I lived in Boston. And the reason why, no, Northeastern University, because they had a program where you could work one quarter and go to school the next, so you could pay your way through. And so since I was paying for everything, that was appealing to me. But I eventually went when my friends went. But it was when I was in graduate school, and I had been working for about 8 years, that when I heard people talking about where people in their school went to, I realized, first of all, that it was a thing. Then I was reading a lot of stuff in classes that really began to pique my interest. Also, you know, I was an employee at Stanford, so I always felt like an outsider, and eventually applied and got into the program. So backdoors do work, and unless you tell people later in life, like I'm doing, it still says Stanford University on the CV. It doesn't say was a special admit or, you know, anything else. But I felt like an outsider, and I was taking one class at a time, and I noticed the class difference at Stanford University. And so people notice class or racial differences in all kinds of different ways. Sometimes people notice the height of the hair. If you tease your hair, that's not a school for me. If you have rich clothes. For me, I noticed teeth. Everybody had perfect white teeth. And that just wasn't what I was used to seeing in my world. So you know, there are ways in which you see yourself vis-a-vis other schools. And given what I was reading, And given the fact that I was reading that people narrow down quickly to about 5 to 7 institutions, but I noticed that those 5 to 7 institutions varied by race and class. You know, when I worked with the Upward Bound program at Stanford, the schools that the students who were mostly African American and Latino went to were not the schools that the white students were going to. So I just noticed a lot of differences, and I also, honestly speaking, was pretty clueless in graduate school. I still hadn't picked up a lot of knowledge about how the world worked. And so I just was noticing that for some people, it's almost default. The nearest school, the neighborhood college, the whatever, where your friends went. But for some people, it's a highly regulated, subsidized, planful process. And that was a novelty to me. And once you realize there's a thing that you didn't know you were supposed to be doing, you kind of pay attention, or you were supposed to know or supposed to act in a particular kind of way. I still get, if I have to set the table, I still get nervous. I have test anxiety about manners. I'm polite, I say thank you and please and all that, but you know, finally my son's occupational therapist said, L for left, for forks, no, for the knives. See what I mean? It's a cultural, active cultural block. I think it's resistance.
You talked a little bit last night about areas that still need to be investigated, and in terms of college choice, and we have a lot of current graduate students that are thinking in their first year, thinking about what career paths they're going to take, and some of them are doing very much and concentrated on college choice. What kind of advice would you have for them if they were to pick up where your book left off?
Oh, don't. No, seriously, you know, it's all different things, right? I mean, I've moved on from the book. I've been doing other things, and it's been a lot of fun. I mean, I have a lot of privilege, and I'm grateful for it. But you know, you want to do what you're passionate about, because you have to forego time with friends and family. You have to get up early or stay up late. You have to carve out time for work, time for, you know, research if you're going to go the route of a PhD or an EDD. And as a practitioner, I wouldn't dream of telling you what to do. I can tell you what important pieces of evidence we have now, but first of all, it's a mutually learning process. So Ryan, when he introduced me last night, mentioned that I've been on the board of NACAC, right? I'm looking to the admissions folks, because does everybody else, National Association of College Admissions Counseling? They instituted a position for researchers to be a researcher, to have a 2-year term and then rotate and other people would go on. And I love that kind of thing. I love where I still keep my feet on the ground. And, you know, I'll talk to high school students. You know, this fall I was in my daughter's school. She's a senior. And I have to say, somebody who spent a life working on college access, 2 kids, neither one of them going to college yet. So, you know, there's karma. Karma in life is, you know what the expression is. So, you know, it's, there's lots of things that can be done. So we've done a lot of research at the individual level about looking at different groups of students. We're in need now of more synthesis across it. So first-gen students, African American, Latino, the differences in the disaggregation of the Asian American population, Native students. We have pieces of research out there. We're not done, but we have a lot. And they share a lot in common, because there are a lot of class differences, and then there are racial and ethnic differences. And if we look more towards synthesizing some of that, then whether we're going to do continuing research or changing practice, there's a lot to be brought to bear. So at UCLA, last year, they had the first gen conference, and a set of money from the University of California Office of the President, the system-wide presence, offered money to do something about first-gen students to all the campuses. UCLA got extra money because not all the campuses were jumping on that fund. It's like, seriously? I mean, why isn't everybody going for it? But, and part of what they did was a survey of literature and a listing of findings. They started right away, setting up an office, having programs. One of the things they did was had faculty identify as first gen. And so I wear my first gen t-shirt so that people can see, you know, oftentimes, and I kind of assumed this when I was a student, you assume that everybody's been smart forever and achieving forever and came from families that did that. But it also helps to know that, you know, I realize that at my age and job, I'm not anybody's role model. And so I've come to terms with that, but, you know, it's still nice to know that people that you see, and we pay attention to it more around race, and I think that that's completely appropriate than we do around class. But even still, class, we sometimes feel the issue of class and sometimes other identities that we might have, but it's helpful to say, look, other people have traversed this path and we can help you, we can talk to you. Our experiences may not be as salient as what the university is like now, but we know what it's like to feel like an outsider to, you know, in the book, I mean, I talk about when you hire SES, you know to, and your parents know to hire a tutor if you're having academic problems. And more often than not, you know, in communities that aren't higher SES, you think some people are smart and some people aren't so smart. Some people must be destined for some other pathway. But, you know, it's nice to have people who visibly represent your identity and are out there. But that's just one thing. So there's very little done on foster youth and the emancipation process and where they go when the dorms close down. It's still underdeveloped in terms of migrant students, students with disabilities of a variety of kinds. We haven't done much in terms of college choice and college access issues. You know, there are two of the conditions that are the biggest barriers. And remember, the biggest barriers are the biggest opportunities, right, for researchers and practitioners to change the world. But there are two number one barriers: the academic preparation and perceptions of affordability. And the academic preparation are things that are often out of students' control, right? Because the schools they go to have underprepared or emergency credentialed teachers. They don't have a lot of honors or advanced placement classes. So it's a physical issue because it's where the school is located and who the population that's served. So we know why those things are happening. And we know that triage programs are fantastic, but they're always outside the school. Triage programs are what I call intervention programs, because there's, in some way of the medical use of triage, you're basically taking a huge need and seeing basically who's in a life-threatening situation. You know, who can we help? Maybe we can focus on somebody for the senior year here, and somebody else or some other program is going to start working with them when they're middle school or freshmen in high school. And I love those programs, but those programs are not integrated into the school for the most part, and they're not empowered in schools. They can't say, you need more of X courses or Y kinds of courses. I'm sorry, I'm ignoring you. And affordability is getting worse by the minute. And it's not, sociologists have long identified that it's people's perceptions that matter more than reality. And the word on the street from family to family is they'll tell you you need $15,000, again, repetition with last night, and they'll give you a package $10,000. And they don't say, by the way, this is unmet need, that $5,000 that's missing from this page. Now, I'm not saying that they're doing this deceptively on purpose or that they're shortchanging students who need it. They're stretching their funds as far as they can go. And you and I were having a conversation earlier about bringing in more privileged students at an institution means that you can then have scholarships for other students. But parents are not going to set their kids up for a fall. They're not going to say, go to any place you want to go. They'll be behind you. When I was a graduate student at Stanford, my mother would say I was, executive to the, basically she called me the president of Stanford to people. Don't tell anybody that. But, it's like, oh, she's very big at Stanford. Right there at the top. In the way that parents oftentimes can't remember what you do because it's different. It's different from what you do and from what they do. And, affordability is you want to, when you're poor, when you're middle class, you research, you hear stories of people who say you can go anywhere you want. But the last thing a parent wants to do is be the one to bust the dreams of their kids, right? I feel lucky. I haven't met the worst parents in the world, right? Most people have good intentions. And so parents want to work with their kids on this. If they have no college experience or if they don't have the financial means, they want to try and help manage expectations. That's why parents will sometimes say, we can afford the community college and hopefully in 2 years you'll be able to transfer to X, Y, or Z university, and all of that goes on. But there are a lot of issues. One of our colleagues in higher education, Don Heller, has been proposing for years that if you're poor in the 7th grade, statistically you're going to be poor in the 12th grade. And if we could get better at sending out messages that said, send people letters that said, if your income is roughly the same, not even getting into the constant dollars or whatever, but you could expect to get, in this kind of neighborhood for funding, or something that says, you're going to be eligible for the state grants. That's why a lot of merit programs statewide came up, the merit programs for talent development and keeping talent in state. It started with the Georgia Hope program. It has mostly served middle class students, not the poor students it was initially intended for. Because if you don't have the money to pay to get in, it doesn't help if you have 1/3 of the money. And it doesn't help if you have half of the money. You've got to figure out a way to get the rest. And so in a review of merit programs, first of all, they take away from need aid. And increasingly, there's merit aid. Were you and I talking about this last night, about enrollment management? And I was talking with somebody yesterday about,
Mary.
Yeah, more and more money has to go to merit to get the best students. The best students will then attract the best faculty. The best faculty will help that institution rise in the college rankings. You rise in the college rankings, you get more resources, more donors, more maybe faculty research grants, more enrollments. And so there's a dynamic there that it's easy to be, I wrote a paper that got a fair amount of traction on college rankings and basically said, they're bragging rights for more affluent families and families who've been going to college for a while. And admissions directors lose their jobs over rankings. If you ever want to see a blood sport, go to NACAC, the national meeting, where they have a thing on rankings, and the head of the rankings is there in the room. I mean, people lose all sense of professional codes of conduct. And I get it, you know, it's a system that is interconnected, but it is very problematic. And the thing about affordability is you never know until the final rung. A lot of people don't know you can take an offer from this institution and go to your institution and say, can you match this offer? Some institutions don't have endowments, or very much of one, or endowments for scholarships. And they have to say, you need to make the decision that's right for you, which is a really nice, polite way of saying, that's our final offer. And you know, what's gonna work for you? Go with that. So people will make less prestigious or less desirable on whatever their metric is. Again, some of them were about as mature as I was then, that's how they are now. So desirability means a whole bunch of different things. And so, so that's affordability are the two big issues. But there are lots of other things, like what are state universities saying their mission is versus where are they directing their money. So the budget, looking at state systems, and with declining state revenue, and unfortunately California leads the nation, and how much we're pulling the financial rug out from our California state universities, our University of California, and our community college system. There are many ways you could go, but it has to grab you. It has to, you know, something came alive when you were working and a student said something to you. I remember a colleague of mine was talking to somebody in the Central Valley of California, which is very rural, very agricultural, not high rates of college going. And, you know, and so my colleague said, well, are you thinking about a 2-year or 4-year institution? And he said, why would I go for 4 years if I can just go for 2? And, you know, it's a knowledge issue. If people, we were also talking about rural college access last night, and a lot of times it means people are leaving home probably for good, because there's not much of a college-educated economy. And so not only do they not know the difference between 2-year and 4-year, but they are, you know, realizing, and people in their community talk about it, means you might never be able to come back home. Long-winded.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit. You won in 2012 the Ash Mentoring Award, and I've read lots of stuff online about how you feel it's really important to be accessible to students and always open. My question for you is, why has mentoring been so important to you, and why is through your mentorship through other people and your mentorship through other doctoral students and students in general, and also I'm imagining you did a lot of mentorship during your practitioner time, but why has that been such a key part of your work?
I wouldn't be here today without mentoring. You know, there are a lot of times when I've been a jerk, right? I came in and I had as an advisor in graduate school, a faculty member who was retired and not really around. And he was very misogynist. And we weren't going to have, we had a cordial relationship, but not the best relationship. And there's this, you know, up in the stratosphere research person who basically offered to pick me up. But she wasn't in my area. And I just, you know, I didn't get it. I didn't know the rules. I wasn't rude, but I also wasn't falling to my knees and saying, you know, thank you, thank you, thank you. But she really always looked out for me. And I mean, you know, I do realize when I don't know the rules or the protocols and whatever, and I follow up on it. And her name is Milbrae McLaughlin. And also, she's really tall and I'm short, so it would be like, yep, yep. And she liked what I was doing and she was a new faculty member at the institution where I was at, but she just, I never really experienced that before. An advisor in my master's program, which was in DC, she was very nice to me, and she said, "You're a bright girl, you deserve better." When I said, "I'm thinking about," and by the way, I got rejected by Berkeley twice, so I settled for Stanford, which I got in the back door. Luck plays you can do all the planning you want, but luck and bad luck also intervene. But so, since graduate school, my biggest form of learning has been from students. Students bringing to me their ideas, their theories that they want to use, their methods. And over the course of 25 plus years, I've served on 160 dissertation committees. Really, your dissertation you only want to do once. But being on the other side of the table is a great experience. And one of the things my advisor said to me, it's 4 smart people devoting 2 hours just to you. And they've already read the hours that it took to read the proposal or the final dissertation. She said, "When do you get that in life?" And I still was nervous, but it made me change my lens of thinking about that. And nobody says you have to serve on dissertation committees, so it's not a mercy date. It's mostly whoever's serving on your dissertation committee cares about you and cares about your topic. So it's been a great source of learning, keeping alive, keeping up with things I don't know about. And I am a people person. I tried to go around and meet you because it feels really weird to sit over there quietly, not knowing anybody, and and so you're supposed to listen to me, but I wasn't good enough to talk to you beforehand. So, that feels natural. Also, I grew up the second oldest of 11, so. But it's a relationship business, just like any aspect of college access is a relationship business. And it's mutually beneficial. And there's so much that doesn't get taught in the classroom. And we, at UCLA, we have this course, I know Ryan's trying to get it here, called RAC, which I know the acronym doesn't sound pleasant, but it's a research apprenticeship course. And you work on some research together, preferably research of the students' choosing, students across the generation, so first year, fourth year, whatever, will learn from each other and learn from the professor. It's supposed to be student-driven. You'll also have conversations. This week, I knew going into the class last Friday that there had been a blow-up in the Wednesday class that all but one of the students took. And so and 2 of them had come to my office to talk to me about what had been going on. And basically, the PhD students were putting down the master students and making them feel like they were impeding their educational progress by, making them slow down. And so we talked about that, and one said that they could voice their concerns, but also said they could develop some strategies. Did they want to work together? Did they want to work alone? There's always issues of vulnerability in graduate school, and they were feeling particularly vulnerable, and some of them were crying. Like, I felt like I am so dumb, I don't belong here. And so all of that, life happens when you're in graduate school, right? So whatever's going on. I mean, one of my undergraduates said, I'm not going to be in class tomorrow because my father's having open heart surgery. It's like, go. Of course. That's the right priority. Do it. People have come to talk about, should I have a baby in graduate school or after? Where would it? Where would it be most inconvenient? You know, I'm not willing to, it's all of it, because every student is a person, you're a person, and it's a whole person approach. And I love teaching, but I also love mentoring, and part of it is because it's a reciprocal process. Did that answer?
Yes. In your talk last night, you mentioned the importance of connecting scholarly work with practitioner work. And I know that most of our master's students are looking to do that, and they're doing it right now in their graduate assistance positions, and they're hoping to continue to do that throughout their career. What recommendations or advice do you have to give early career practitioners to ensure that they do this in their work now and in their work in their future career paths?
Well, one thing is to kind of take control of your life. You get the life you get because you work for it, but also because there are defaults in life, right? So you have to be attentive to what your boss wants you to do. And maybe what you want to do and what your boss wants to do is 80% the same, but 20% different. Well, then you got to figure out how to fit that in, how to have maybe one thing serve two goals. You got to have people you can talk to and figure out. My first publication was in the NACAC journal. You know, and some of that it was easier to get in there, and I wasn't sure I was going to be good enough for the other peer-reviewed academic journals. But I also always try to work with practitioner groups throughout my career. So I work with school districts. I mean, I'm a higher ed scholar, but at the access point, you're in both worlds, and you have to know. And who am I to come up with suggestions for what we need in access if I don't stay close to what the issues are on the ground? And I had a 5-year collaborative project with a subsection of a group of feeder schools within LAUSD. And I ended up there accidentally. Somebody invited me to a meeting, and it was somebody whose work I respected, a practitioner, and so she said, can you come to this meeting? I didn't know they were inviting me into a collaboration with them that was going to last 5 years. But, you know, I wanted to do it, and that's how the whole concept of creating a college culture developed out of that project. And basically, I was invited. Somewhere along the way, they asked me to talk about organizational culture and climate. It's like, oh my God, I have to give a lecture impromptu, but not have it feel like a lecture because I'm in a meeting. And every week at the meeting, my job was to bring what do we know from research. And then their job was to say, we can or can't do it. And I was the 2-year-old in the room who constantly said, why? Why can't we change the master schedule? We can't do that. You know, why can't we have all the sophomores take the PSATs? You know, and so I was just a perfect 2-year-old. Why? Not, I knew I had to keep it from that annoying point, so there were long pauses between the whys. But, you know, I don't know about union rules. I don't know about who sets in the beginning. I don't know about who sets the calendar. I mean, the course schedule for the next year, you know, what the impediments are, all of those things. And so I had to just work, you have to work, I believe you have to work hand in hand. If you're trying to fix something, and you know some parts of it, but not I want a doctor who, if I had a heart problem, who knows how to keep the whole body going, not just the heart, right? Or, you know, I have metal knees. I wanted to know that he was going to make sure I lived through the surgery, right? Now this doctor, surgeon, he even had social skills, which was amazing. Because surgeons, they're used to dealing with unconscious people. And there's a big tendency towards arrogance too. But, you know, I don't want my mechanic to not know all the parts of the car. Because they may figure out a way to fix something, but, you know, they didn't take account for something down the line and it's not going to work. So I fundamentally believe that, And then I look for people who are good at the jobs. I've met some of the best high school counselors in the world. You know, PSAT in the potty, right? Close the door of the bathroom stall, here's a PSAT question. And as she said, it serves two purposes if you run out of toilet paper. It's like, wow, always thinking. You know, but practitioners are incredibly creative. And we all sometimes take the stance of we can't do that because it's the rules or whatever. But if you keep pushing on something, that's how change happens. If you partner and collaborate, if you get stakeholders involved, if you figure out where the leverage points are in any organization. This counselor also, when it came time to announce, you know, the back to school college night, she would write up a press release for the principal to send to the local newspaper. She would also then take care of sending it. He just had to sign it. In this case, it was a he. And she would talk about how wonderful he was. She would also say how wonderful she was and how grateful he was to have her as the college counselor. And she would, on the side, she loved to make cheesecakes, and he loved her cheesecakes. So, you know, she plied him with cheese. You know, it's people skills. What are you going to do to make allies? And my philosophy in life is there was a counselor who I actually liked, but who was always a naysayer. Whenever you're planning something, you have to have a naysayer. You have to have somebody who's going to be like, you know, the whole thing. Because you need to know what you're going to face. You need to know what it's going to take. And if you get them in a process, if you can win them over, the rest of it's easy. And, you know, the other naysayers are going to go up and say, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And so people skills play a lot, but keeping that practitioner, researcher, policy balance, all of that in play makes whatever it is that you're doing better work.
It's about 1:10, and I want to make sure we have time for everyone's questions. So at this time, I'll open it up for questions from the audience.
I'm a nice person, I don't mind.
I just have a question. So, of course, with all of your scholarship and college access, I'm just curious as to what you think the future is for standardized tests as it relates to college access. Like, what do you see as the future for the requirement of SATs and ACTs, and do you think that'll always continually be something that universities expect?
My position is hopeful, but also some cynicism. They're not going away anytime too soon. It's a huge moneymaker, right? So ETS, ACT, they're not going to say, you know what, we're not going to do this anymore. They aren't even willing to say the tests are biased, right? To have them walk away. And, you know, for those of you who work in admissions offices, so UCLA's applications right now for this admission season is, I think, 114,000 applications. Now, the way UCLA does it is they have a matrix of SATs and GPAs, and if you draw a line from the top left corner to the bottom right corner, my right and left, I can't do that for you, up here to down here, half of those are going to get in on the calculus of grades and test scores. The other half are going to get a holistic review of some kind. Now, I ran an Upward Bound program, and I was a reader for Stanford admissions. So when I was a graduate student, I was trying to pick up some of my own experience, temporary or short-term though it may be. And there's a lot of great literature out there about how you do various kinds of holistic reviews And one book I would absolutely recommend if you don't know it is Mitchell Stevens' Crafting a Class. When you go to that other half, then you're bringing all of the complexity of the individual human being, as opposed to, you know, there's a way where it can, like, I got 100 folders left to do, and then I can watch mind-numbing TV, right? Or I'm gonna promise myself I can go for a walk, whatever it is, right? And, you know, sometimes you can, I read the year that Dead Poets Society came out. So about 65% of the essays were carpe diem. And, you know, with a lot of energy and enthusiasm and excitement, not so much. You know, I had to work to not take it for granted that, you know, this was my, you know, 100th carpe diem essay today, so I had to still be interested in the student. But getting across who you are or why you may not have the calculus to be in that top half that get the quick review, you know, the basic eligibility. And selective admissions, I always say, is choosing the lucky from the worthy, right? Because if you've got 114,000 applications, you're gonna keep narrowing that pool down, incomplete. Not even close to the GPA they need. It's so low, we'd be worried about whether or not they could cut it. All the stuff that you do. And then you're trying to decide, you know, from papers, and what you can glean from those papers of what the individual is and what they could bring to the university. All of that is a very difficult process. And the SATs and ACTs are shortcuts. More importantly, the cynical part comes from the US News and World Report rankings, right? Higher SATs, better faculty, higher in the rankings, more prestige, more resources. That is a noose around the neck, right? About 20 years ago, the president of Stanford was Caspar Gerhardt, and he wrote a letter to his 13 colleagues in the Ivies and the highly selective institutions, saying, if we all drop out of the rankings, they'll no longer be valid. If one of us does it, it's going to be a drop in the ocean. But if we all drop out, we could stop this nuclear arms race of, you know, statistics about how great our students are, how great our faculty are, how much money we bring in, all of it. And not a one would join him. So even if you go, and there are people who take pride in their test optional, but they're not in this highly competitive top rung. Then you have all the large numbers of institutions that never make it into those lists, right? They're just, you know, maybe if you buy the regional issue, but they shortchange a whole host of large numbers of students, host of institutions and a large number of students. And so it's hard to make change on your own, but until we can loosen that stranglehold of it's a shortcut. So Mitchell Stevens' book talks about coarse sorts and fine distinctions. So the coarse sorts are the, you know, the top half of the graph, or the, you know, minimum GPA to keep floating in the pool. And the fine distinctions, what you do is you develop these people. So when I read for Stanford, I had, let's say I had 100 files, 50 of them had to be rejected. No messing around with that. 25 could be in the swim category. They're still in the pool, but they're not in the accepted, right? So that is 25 and 25. You know, and I'm a seasonal reader, so I did my job and then that was it. And the professional full-time staff are the folks who were meeting and making the decisions. And Stephen's book is based on, I think, 18 months of work in an admissions office. And he talks about narrative story. The defined distinctions are, I've got this student, we deal a lot with the school. They're students. We know their students are going to be a slam dunk. They won't send us anybody who's not the right fit with us academically. And then they'll get into the narrative storytelling about who the student has done, how they have walked on water multiple times, they swim as a backup skill. They have been anointed by Mother Teresa to, carry on her work, the whole thing, right? Ever read an essay, right? I mean, nobody's saying he's a putz. Don't look any further, right? It's like, what are you gonna do? And and from the faculty side, I remember asking a luminary in the field if he would consider writing me a letter of recommendation for tenure. And you gotta understand, I valued what he said to me, which was, I have a really high bar, and if you don't meet it, I will say that in the letter. I said, okay, thanks, bye. But it was honest, right? And he said, this is my value, and I can respect that. And that, I feel, was a way where he said, you don't want me to write a letter, right? And that's valuable. But for the most part, people, when they ask you to write a letter, assume you're going to say nice things. They're timid about it, but they're, that's what they do. So you've got the coarse sorts, and you're done. And then you've got the fine distinctions. And then, a group of people are sitting around the table talking about you and trying to, you're a lot like this other person who has relatively equal merit in different ways, and how do we choose? And, more often than not, this, that's where financing fits in. The family can afford to pay. If you're running low on your financial aid money, you're going to take the family can afford to pay. Because, again, that not only meets the enrollment targets, and it meets helps augment the financial aid pool, and for an institution, that's win-win. For the person on this side who got left behind in the dust, not so much. So, did I even approach answering your question?
You did.
So I think that until we can, the problem with this is privatization and outside providers who make a profit. And that has been growing and growing, and their influence grows and grows. And until we stop that privatization, nobody's willing to say, I can't have some nationally standardized measure, however faulty it is, I can't let it go because we'll lose donations, et cetera, et cetera. But somebody in this room is going to come up with the research that will be another chink in the armor so that we can get those out of the way sooner rather than later.
Time for about one more question.
Remember, she said you had to come up with 3.
So let's take your analogy of getting rid of them sooner than later. Given all the research that you've done and are familiar with, what is the best, most equitable next step if test scores are eliminated from admission? Understanding the 24,000 in DU's case or 114,000 in UCLA's case. Given like Angela Duckworth's work on grit and multiple groups' work on character and integrity and persistence, what do you think is one of the next steps that has some teeth to it?
Well, first of all, I think every set of criteria can be gained.
Totally.
Right? So we're always recreating the wheel. And these are all natural things. And individuals are going to try to be better at whatever it is that you're looking for. So we could look at criteria that we want to see in society. Lanny Guinier's work talks about trying to pick people based on what they're going to do in college in the way of public service and serving the public good. Character is one. There's a guy who used Sternberg, has other things that he's done to try and get a sense of a person who may contribute more to society. I was just having a conversation with Ryan yesterday. It seems like forever, but it was just yesterday about, there are a lot of folks. So there's this larger issue: is college even going to be relevant anymore? Are we going to have college? And all those people who are saying it have pretty prestigious credentials, and their own kids are being sent to the top schools. So always, critical perspective. Who's got power? Who's going to benefit? Who's going to lose? So I don't think everything's going to stay the same, but I don't think college is going to go away. It's not going to be the only form of learning. But there are a lot of people who say that creativity has been squelched because our current high-stakes admissions process drives itself through people's high school experiences, and they're just going to follow the rules and be afraid to take risks and not be very creative. And that has been something highly valued in this society and highly rewarded and productive if you sort of look at some of our civilization and how it changes. So I don't have a solution, but I would look, and if we say, somebody who's going to do more, it's like right now the service requirement. I fear that too many people with their service, it's like a drive-by shooting. It's like you just do it because it's a box you have to check off. It's not because you're passionate about it or you like it or fill in a box. And so if we say you're going to contribute more to the university in your years and be ready to be a fully participating citizen of society, well, it's all going to be. But I think we need to look at other characteristics. We're smart enough to figure this out. Have I got the answer? No. And, I sit through graduate admissions meetings every year. I had horrible SATs and GREs. I'm on the, almost making it to the national average. So I don't test well. There's part of me that thinks I'd like to take the GRE down. Maybe I'd do that. Because I always feel bad that I was not a good test taker. Have I contributed? Yeah. Could I have done more? Yeah. But, what's it really measuring? And when I teach a college access course, I always have students read the National Academy of Sciences book on admissions tests. And they go through the history and purpose of the SAT and the ACT. And, they're not predictive of much beyond the first term's grades. I think we can do without them, but we still need a way to sort. And that's the problem. Now we could be a different kind of society and invest more, but we're not going to in higher quality education across the board rather than some elites. We're invested in getting the best for ourselves and our kids, and that's a natural process. I don't want parents who don't care about their kids, right? But the problem is that resources are inequitably distributed. We're not going to change this unless we change the power and money structure. And so we have to have dedicated people like you who are nodding a lot and having this smile, but yeah, you're right. It's a bigger issue. It plays out because education is the societal instrument for social reproduction. So and we also have this notion that sociologists call it being reified. It's like, what? We can do away with tests? It's like, yeah, they didn't, they were invented because Jews were outscoring WASPs in the 1915s to 1919s. And, at Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, they exchanged letters, a beautiful piece of research by Jerry Carabell, And they said, we have to do something about the Jewish problem. And they came up with, because there were too many Jews from the urban East Coast centers, Boston and New York. And so they came up with geographical diversity, right? That's where that started. And it was the first discretionary admissions process. It's like, we don't like the output of the test, so we're gonna do this. And, you know, different things that we now consider foundational were invented by people, mostly for exclusionary purposes, all along the way. They're always admitted, they're always chosen for excluding. It may be a practical issue of 60,000 apply, we can only take 20,000. But it's still a process, except, you know, in open access institutions, which are roughly 80% of the students in college in America. You know, I was appalled when I first started thinking about college access research, and the University of Massachusetts Amherst is not on any selectivity level. It's definitely, totally non-selective. It's a little bruise to the ego, but, you know, I couldn't even say it was the best institution in the state. I mean, Harvard, MIT, you know what I'm talking about? So what we would say is we were the best of Western Massachusetts. But there was still Smith, Amherst, Williams, blah, blah, blah. So whatever. It's like saying you're my favorite child who's a boy. And you have one boy and one girl. My favorite boy child, my favorite girl child. So, sorry, I know we can do it, but I also know it's gonna be a long process.
We're grappling with it.
Yeah, every day, and you know more about it than I do, so what's your answer?
We're grappling with it. That's my answer. We're researching it. We're actively researching it.
Okay, you hear that? Opportunity. Okay, it's rethinking, and for those of you who weren't there, yes, I said you have to think about things in new ways. Just like if you didn't know about the first discretionary admissions criteria, you know, it's like, oh, well, that worked, not for good reason. And, you know, the reason why the colleges were corresponding, the presidents were corresponding with each other is there was a drop in donors. Even in the 1919 era. So there's always opportunity. Listen to your gut and see what floats your boat when you're reading something and trying to stay awake. You know, even my book, it's like, right? You do that and all of a sudden it's like, huh, I hadn't thought about it before. Maybe it isn't a transformative moment, but then you start reading some other stuff and things. Think of it, if you cook, as a pot, and you're throwing stuff in over time, and you're seeing how the flavors come together. And, you know, you don't know what you're making, but you just keep throwing the interesting aha moments all together in a pot. See where you get. Are we ending on that?
I think so, yes.
Go cook.